CountryWide Connect with Andy Thompson and Sarah Perriam-Lamp.
The other thing we're not far away from is an election on the 7th of November, so we are well and truly on the countdown for that, which means there is lots of policy being announced. Yesterday, the Green Party announced its freshwater policy, drink, swim, fish, here it is here, and fixing the rules for freshwater and oceans. Joining me now, to talk about that is a Green Party Agriculture and Environment spokesman, Steve Abel. The Green Party's drink, swim, fish policy proposes lowering nitrate limits in drinking water, phasing out synthetic nitrogen, fertiliser and reducing livestock stocking rates. The Greens say it's about protecting public health and our environment. Critics say the science remains contested and the economic consequences haven't been fully explained. Steve Abel is there with us on the line. G'day, Steve. Welcome to the show. Really appreciate your time. Thank you for coming on here. Steve, first up, what's the strongest scientific evidence that convinced the Green Party the current nitrate standards no longer adequately protect New Zealanders?
Yeah, so there's scientific evidence on the nitrate being a risk for bowel cancer and other forms of cancer and preterm birth that have come from multiple studies around the world. The famous one being the Danish study. In recent years, there's been subsequent studies on that, and previous to that, studies in Spain and Italy, in the United States and California on the risk of preterm birth for pregnant women ingesting high levels of nitrate in drinking water. And of course, since the 50s, we've known about the risk of blue baby syndrome if you mix infant formula using high nitrogen or high nitrate drinking water. It's a risk for deoxygenation of the baby's blood. So we've known about nitrate as a health risk for a long time.
Okay, I appreciate that. Bowel Cancer New Zealand has published the clearest possible statement, says nitrates in drinking water are highly unlikely to increase the risk of bowel cancer in New Zealand, according to the current weight of evidence. Surely Bowel Cancer New Zealand know about cancer
and what causes it. Bowel Cancer New Zealand don't have any published evidence for that position. Our position is based on published evidence, overseas scientific data, and also local scientific data. For example, out of Otago University.
Yeah. Okay. So on that, the evidence is Steve, the evidence is contested. There is no scientific consensus that nitrate levels commonly found in New Zealand cause colorectal cancer. Most of the studies are observational. They show association, not proof of causation. The one you're talking about coming down from Dunedin was an observational study. Again, it was led by Tim Chambers, his expertise in public health researcher. It was a health modelling study. It did not do any science to prove that nitrate causes colon cancer.
Yeah, so there's a few studies he's done, but the one that you're talking about was a study based on the information from Denmark, which worked out that there's 800,000 New Zealanders exposed to hazardous levels of nitrate in drinking water in New Zealand, and that means 100 new cases of bowel cancer every year and 40 deaths every year. The work he's done on the direct link to nitrate in the pathway has found evidence of nitrate, he actually did work on the preterm birth risk and evidence of nitrate in cord blood, which links the fact that we know that nitrate's a risk for blue baby syndrome to that being the potential pathway to it causing preterm birth in pregnant people. So there's, and the Californian study on that is a very thorough and substantive study. It joins dozens of studies from around the world that have linked nitrate to health risks. So it's emerging evidence, but a precautionary approach would be that we say on the basis of that
precautionary approach, precautionary approach, not actually science. Most of these studies.
Can I speak to that point? So it takes years and years and years for us to get conclusive evidence that lead is bad for us, that smoking is bad for us, that asbestos is bad for us. In fact, you have to respond to the emerging evidence which shows a fair indication that there's a problem here, and therefore it's good to avoid lead, asbestos, and smoking. If you look at the time where it became conclusive, it's often decades after the time that there was solid scientific evidence that that those chemicals and substances were a problem.
But
This is a standard thing in science for us to look at the emerging evidence.
But okay, I get that. But you also these studies by Tim Chambers, as you said causes 40 deaths a year. That's not proven in any way, shape, or form. Most of these studies are done are observational. They don't rule out factors like diet, smoking, obesity, and lifestyle.
Yes, they do. No, they did. They totally did rule those things out. And in fact, it'd be ludicrous to not rule those things out. The studies out of Spain and Italy did exactly that. They found exactly the same thing based on prevalence of bowel cancer. They included diet, they included exposure. They found one of the interesting things is that exposure to vegetables is a protector against cancer, even though vegetables are high in nitrate. And the reason is that they also contain antioxidants, which neutralizes the negative effect of the nitrate in the diet. So these are very much a definition of scientific studies that show that there's a link between nitrate and bowel cancer, and a link between nitrate and preterm birth.
Okay, let's move on to the 100,000 people getting sick from drinking unsafe drinking water each year. Doesn't that figure really represent Campylobacter, E. coli, other pathogens, not nitrates?
That's right, mostly, yeah.
But where do you get the figure of 100,000? Well, I think there would be a lot of people who would be quite shocked to hear that 100,000 people. Where's the evidence of that?
Oh, it's health data you can get. You can Google it. I mean, there are a lot of people get sick from exposure to contaminated drinking water in this country. A lot more than people realize. I mean, you look how often boil water notices come on in rural areas, and the instances of sickness from exposure to contaminated water and the things like E. coli and Campylobacter. These are things that are, E. coli is the main one, but these are things that are well evidenced in, the health department data.
So that figure, for as far as I can tell, comes from the Have a Look North Drinking Water Inquiry, which estimated 18 to 100,000 of waterborne illness annually. Why not go with at least a midpoint? At least a midpoint. Why go straight to up to 100,000? Makes a nice headline, I get that, right? But isn't that just shock and scare tactics?
No, it's the figure that's been put out there. And let's be clear about that. There's probably a lot of underreporting. There's probably a lot of people who don't know that when they've got a stomach upset, it's to do with something they've consumed in their water. So I think it's probably reasonable to extrapolate that there could be significantly more than 100,000 people getting sick from drinking water. And, it's a fact of our nature that we need safe, clean drinking water. And over the course of time, the access to that is under threat. And it's worsening if we don't protect the sources of that drinking water, which is rivers, lakes, and aquifers. And the over-nutrification of catchments, which predominantly does come from the dairy industry, I'm afraid to say, has caused the degradation in freshwater quality. And, for an industry that takes up 7% of our land area, it provides 38% of the nitrogen that makes it to the marine coastal environment, which also causes nutrification and algal blooms and the likes of things that threaten even our fishery. So managing the flow of nutrients into catchments is a very sensible thing to do.
So by doing that, you want to ban the use of synthetic nitrogen or phase out the use of synthetic nitrogen, which happens to be one of the greatest inventions of the 20th century, which has allowed billions of people to grow and survive and thrive. And by losing that, we would have far less crops in New Zealand, we would have far less income, far less milk, and far less inputs. Have you modelled the response or what this would mean for the New Zealand economy if this policy became fact or became enacted?
So there's no time frame on the phase out. We talk about an initial cut in our Heiara Anamata, our climate policy from 2024, to synthetic nitrogen fertiliser on dairy farms being the current average, which is about 20 to 25 kgs per hectare. The cap at 190 kgs is way above what most farmers use, and in fact, Minister Hoggard said he feels that there's fewer than 1% of farmers using 190 kgs. So the cap is not having any effect on lowering nitrate use. In terms of the broad schema of what's happened over the last century in terms of global food production, there's no question that synthetic nitrogen fertilizer drove a massive increase in industrial farming. With that came a boom in population. With that came mass clearances of, of land for agriculture. But in terms of the grand scheme of things, it's a big problem for us on a planetary scale if we don't take note of having exceeded.
So what's the option then? What do we do? If we need to keep feeding the people on the planet, right?
Yeah.
If we're going to phase out the use of synthetic nitrogen, you can't take something out without putting something back. What do we use?
That's right. So currently there's farmers in New Zealand who are farming without synthetic nitrogen fertiliser. Dairy farmers even making, decent livelihoods.
Steve, I just spoke to a cropping farmer who just said to me, without synthetic nitrogen, there would be no wheat, there would be no barley in New Zealand. It would not be economic for them to produce it. We would have to import everything.
Okay, so for a start, we're talking about dairying, and over time...
No, you're phasing out synthetic nitrogen. That's what you say. You don't say phase it out for the use of dairy. You go... phase out synthetic nitrogen use fertiliser and take action to reduce stocking rates on a catchment basis. But if you want to phase out synthetic nitrogen, it goes completely.
Yeah, over time. There's no time frame on that. And I understand that we can't just switch, switching it off overnight would be disastrous. I mean, but if you look at what's happened in a place like Sikkim, where they have phased it out over a relatively short space of time, they're still producing vast volumes of food. And don't tell me that we didn't grow wheat and barley before we had synthetic nitrogen fertilizer. That's nonsensical. We've been growing wheat and barley for
No, we can grow it. We can't grow it economically. That's the difference. And if you can't grow it economically, no one's going to grow it.
Let me speak to that. So tell me how the biggest user of fertilizer in our country, 60% of it is used by the dairy industry. There are dairy farmers right now who are getting a third more per kilo for their milk solids than conventional dairy farmers, and they're using no synthetic nitrogen fertilizer. So they are making livelihoods, they are farm gate profitable, and they're not using synthetic nitrogen fertilizer.
Yeah, but their yields are lower. Their yields are lower, significantly lower. They're getting paid more because there is a premium, because people are prepared to pay more for an organic, right?
Yep.
But we have a cost of living crisis as well, Steve. Come on, you can't have it both ways.
Yeah, well, you can't have it both ways because 95% of the dairy we produce is for export. And there's a $10 block of butter at my supermarket this morning. It's like the dairy industry doesn't care how much New Zealanders pay for their butter.
What about vegetables?
They provide for an export sector, and that's under our current regime. So yes, addressing the cost of living is important, and addressing the cost of food is important, and we'll come up with policy on that front soon. But the idea that just volumetric production of milk that becomes dried powder that gets exported for confectionery is somehow feeding the world is garbage. But we need to be producing high quality food and nutrition for people. And in terms of the value to us as a society, the cost of that 95% dairy surplus that we produce comes at the cost of our rivers and our
I hear what you're saying, Steve. I'm talking
environment.
about the cost of production when it comes to growing wheat and grain and barley for bread, and also for vegetables, which are heavy nitrogen users. Okay, and so we've had a cropping farmer on the show who said it is uneconomic for him to continue growing the crops. The only thing he could grow is peas. Basically, he said, because they fix nitrogen, they don't need any. I guess.
Well, okay, so there is another thing, isn't it? So see, over the last century, essentially, since Haber-Bosch came in, a century ago, we've had this vast explosion of a certain form of intensive farming. It's destroyed soil structure, it's polluted waterways, it's done a vast amount of damage to the environment, and yes, it's given us this big sugar hit, but it's not sustainable. That's our key point. It's not sustainable. A farmer who right now is locked into that dependence on synthetic nitrogen fertilizer, we're sympathetic with that. We're not going to switch that off. Certainly not in cropping and arable and vegetable production. But
well, that's not what your policy says. It's not what your policy says. Look, I've got it right here.
Yeah, it says phase out.
Yeah,
phase out.
It does not say phase out for dairy only. It says phase out.
But it says phase out. It says phase out.
Yeah,
and it doesn't give a time frame. And so let's be clear, just for the clarity of your listeners, your people viewing, the main thing that we have direct policy position on in the fertilizer space is in the dairy, and it's about lowering the nitrogen cap to about 125 kgs per hectare. That's the only absolute thing that we've agreed on doing. We are not going to switch off synthetic nitrogen fertilizer for arable production or for vegetable production, but let's be clear, there are people growing without synthetic nitrogen fertilizer in both the arable and the vegetable space as well. You can do it. And in fact, for most of the course of human history, we have been producing plenty of food, plenty of nutritious food in a way that's much less destructive.
We didn't have 8 billion people on the planet though, Steve, and I'd just like to know which of the 8 billion really do want to starve to death. But anyway, that's
a big lie. That's a very dangerous big lie, mate.
Is
because
it?
The fact is, yeah, it is, because we don't have a shortage of food. And the problem is that we have excessive consumption in certain parts of the world of not particularly nutritious food, and we have an undersupply of food to other parts of the world, or we have food that become sources of export food to the wealthier parts of the world. There's no indication there's an actual problem with our ability to produce food volumetrically. But the biggest threat to that volumetric production over the coming century is climate change. The biggest threat to food production is climate change. One of the biggest causes of climate change is intensive agriculture, unfortunately, along with fossil fuel burning. It's synthetic nitrogen fertilizers produce nitrous oxide, a 300 times more potent greenhouse gas than carbon dioxide, and methane emissions. These are things that drive instability in our climatic system, which are the biggest single threat, as scientists accept, to food production. So if we want to have a holistic view of how we make our society sustainable, not just for the next election cycle, but for the next few centuries and ideally thousands of years, we have to think about those bits of it that are currently really unsustainable. And one of them is our excessive use of synthetic nitrogen fertilizer.
All right. Hey, Steve, great debate, great discussion. Thank you so much for coming on. Always love our chats. Hope we can still have that beer next time we meet. We'll see you again.
Oh, absolutely.
But we will talk more.
And I appreciate we can have this conversation, mate.
Thank you. Steve Abel there, Greens agricultural spokesperson. And there was another term here, I can't remember. Environment, maybe? That would definitely go without saying if you're in the Greens anyway. I think it's full stop.
CountryWide Connect with Andy Thompson and Sarah Perriam-Lapp.